All right, let's take a break from the madness and talk about the SAVE Act, at least a little bit more, or more accurately, the latest Senate push behind it, because this one deserves more than bumper sticker politics. And of course, this is happening while almost all the world in the media are focused on the Iran war. But the SAVE Act advanced out of the Senate today by a 51 to 48 vote that clears the first hurdle, which now sets the stage for the debate to begin about the bill. And as our representatives, so to speak, begin debate, I wonder if any one of them will bring up what I'm about to lay out right here. Now, first, I do want to set this up by addressing the GOP and President Trump's messaging on this lately. Trump was on the road stumping for the bill and claimed that if the SAVE Act didn't pass, or if it doesn't pass, the Republicans will never again win another election. And right here out of the gate, here's a question I'm not hearing anybody in Washington seemingly eager to answer honestly. Okay, if Republicans already hold the House, the Senate, and the presidency, why is President Trump talking like if this bill doesn't pass, Republicans may never win again? That's not that's a massive statement. This isn't just, hey, this is good reform. This is not, this will improve confidence. This is pass this or the future is gone. And when a politician talks like that, grown adults should stop clapping for 5 seconds and ask, what exactly is in this thing that matters so much? And don't tell me, okay, it's we the people. Since when have our elected overlords actually wanted to advance freedom and liberty in a meaningful way of you and me, we the people? Furthermore, let's be real about this. Republicans have won quite a bit over the last 4 decades without the SAVE Act, okay? America has only had 3 Democrat presidents in the last 44 years. Now, yes, Democrats often held the Senate and sometimes the House, but Republicans have hardly been wandering in the wilderness wearing sackcloth and ashes when it comes to the ballot box. So why the apocalyptic rhetoric now? Why the full court press? Why the ultimatum? I think the answer is simple, and this is my take and my read on this right now. And so far, I've not been proven wrong. This bill is not just about showing ID to vote. That's a part of it, and I'm all for that. But it's about who controls the machinery of election verification going forward. To be fair, there are parts of this bill that conservatives and conservatives like me will naturally like, and I do. First, the SAVE Act requires documentary proof of U.S. citizenship to register to vote in federal elections. Okay, so a passport, certain birth certificate plus ID combinations, military records in some cases. And we've gone over this in a previous installment here of Daily Dose. You can check that out on the channel. Naturalization papers also. Now, on the surface, that sounds like common sense, right? Only citizens should vote in American elections. That's not extreme. That's not radical. That's not anti-democracy. That's Civilization 101. Congress.gov's own summary says the bill bars states from accepting and processing a federal voter registration unless the applicant presents documentary proof of citizenship. That's good. Go team. Second, the bill tells states to take ongoing affirmative steps to make sure that only citizens remain on the rolls, and it allows states to use information from DHS and Social Security systems to identify non-citizens and remove them. Now, there could be some privacy issues there. Nonetheless, this is about purging the voter rolls. That must happen. And again, from a conservative perspective, that's basic maintenance. Voter rolls should be clean. Dead people shouldn't vote. Non-citizens should not vote. And sloppy rolls erode trust. That much is true. Now, third, there's a provisional ballot safeguard in the text. The bill says nothing in it should prevent a person from casting a provisional ballot so long as citizenship can be later verified. And that's important. And supporters rightly will point to that as a protection against outright disenfranchisement. So yeah, there are some real pros. There are positives to this bill. Election integrity matters. Citizenship matters. Verification matters. And ID should absolutely be necessary when you go to cast your vote. Conservatives shouldn't be embarrassed to say that. But on the other side, because this is where the bill now stops being a simple show your ID and move along, and we have to look at this other side honestly and ask some questions. This isn't just basic reform because it starts looking like Washington doing what Washington always does, taking a principle that people broadly support and then attaching a much larger enforcement architecture to it. The first major concern here is federal preemption. The National Conference of State Legislatures says this bill would preempt state voter registration processes and impose stricter voter ID requirements than those used in most states. Now, again, this is just for federal elections, not statewide elections. But in other words, this is not merely encouraging encouraging states to tighten their systems. This is Washington telling the states, hey, move over. We're in the driver's seat now. And that, I think, is a dangerous place to be. Conservatives are supposed to like federalism, at least on the days when it's inconvenient to forget it, right? Second, the bill is stricter, than most people realize. If you register by mail, the bill requires you to present proof of citizenship in person to an election official by the state deadline, unless you're in a same-day registration state and you can do it at the polling place. Now, that means that the ID itself is not enough. So the mail registration option becomes kind of a fake convenience. It's like being told you can order online as long as you still drive down to the shop and stand in line anyway, okay? And third, and this is where my alarm bells go off, really. The bill explicitly says that acceptable proof can include identification consistent with the Real ID Act of 2005 that indicates that the applicant is a U.S. citizen. In fact, that is the first line of defense in this bill. Now, this matters because, again, I'm going to go, using Congress's own summaries. The White House text says this. The NCSL notes a serious complication that while applicants for Real ID provide documents for lawful status, the gold star marking on a Real ID is generally the same for a citizen as it is a lawfully present non-citizen. So in plain English, Real ID is not the clean, simple silver bullet politicians want to pretend that it is. And this is my objection. I'm all for showing state-issued ID. I think most Americans are for that. But Real ID is a different animal. This is what I called out in my first video about this. Okay, official state DMV and DHS related guidance says that Real ID was built for federal purposes like boarding commercial flights and entering certain federal facilities. Now that already tells you what kind of creature this is. This is not merely local identification, but a credential shaped around federal standards and federal acceptance. And we need to be careful and precise. Real ID is not a national ID card, at least not yet. And there is no single federal database of all driver information, okay? And that's fair enough. But conservatives, we don't need to be naive just because the brochure gives us some soothing language. Here, the larger issue is not what Washington calls a system. The larger issue is what Washington does with the system once it exists. Because the history of government is the history of mission creep. First, the ID is for flying on planes. Then it's for entering federal buildings. Then it's for voter integrity. Then it's for national security. Then it's for efficiency. Then it's for your convenience. Then it's for your health care, and so on and so on. And one day, you wake up and the permission slip now becomes the point. And fourth concern here, the bill adds a private right of action and criminal penalties. Translation, election officials who make mistakes can get sued and in some cases face criminal exposure. That may sound tough and satisfying on cable news, but in the real world, it can also lead to defensive bureaucracy, slower processing, and overcorrection, and a whole lot of deny first, ask questions never. Washington loves to write laws where the little guy pays the price for the big guy's press release. You can imagine the lawsuits when all of a sudden we start challenging whether or not the count was right or not in this state or that state. Opens the door for that kind of lawsuit. And fifth, lastly, the bill gives states access to Department of Homeland Security's STAVE immigration status system and other federal data to verify citizenship and scrub the rolls with aggressive timelines. Again, the principle sounds fine, but the enforcement structure matters. Bureaucratic databases are not God. They are not omniscient. They're not infallible. And when government gets something wrong, it rarely apologizes with the same energy it uses when it accuses you in the first place. Now, maybe the most revealing detail of all, the NCSL says the bill creates new state responsibilities without authorizing federal funding, and it includes no phase-in period. Okay? And this is classic Washington. Pass a sweeping federal mandate and hand the bill to the states, and then act shocked when the implementation is messy. The people who lecture us about protecting democracy can never seem to budget for the mess they create when they are fiddling around with it. So why do our politicians want this so badly? Well, it does three things at one time. One, it gives Republicans a potent midterm message on election integrity. It shifts more election enforcement then. Number two, it shifts more election enforcement toward a federal framework, okay, more consolidating of power in DC. And three, it lets politicians campaign on just showing an ID while the actual bill reaches much further into citizenship documentation, database checks, list maintenance, legal liability, and tighter control over how states run federal election registration. This is my read on this whole thing, and I think the text backs this up. So here's the bottom line. If you want voter ID, well, say voter ID. If you want proof of citizenship, say proof of citizenship. If you want clean voter rolls, say clean voting rolls. But don't sell the country a common sense reform if what you're really building is a bigger federal enforcement machine with real ID sitting there like the hinge on the door. Because the danger in America is almost never that government will show up wearing a skull mask and twirling a villain mustache. The danger is that government shows up like your long lost best friend and says, this is for your security. This is to protect your freedom. Just sign here at the bottom line. And conservatives of all people should know this. A government powerful enough to verify everything about you is a government powerful enough to control far more than it will ever admit. And that's why this debate matters. Not because only citizens should vote. Clearly, that's a given. Only citizens should vote. Not because election integrity is fake. It isn't. Election integrity is real. And we have an election integrity problem in this country. Not because people shouldn't show their ID to vote. They absolutely should. But because every generation has to decide whether it wants secure elections under constitutional restraint or secure elections disguised and used as one more excuse for centralized control. Because once the machinery of control is built, it almost never shrinks. It just waits for the next crisis. Tell me what you think. Do you think the SAVE Act is necessary? Do you think this is the most important bill since the founding of the country? What have you? Am I off my rocker? Probably I am. Usually I am. Let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts about my thoughts here on the channel. And remember, you can find Culture Crossroads every Sunday at 5 p.m. Central Time, BeckTV.plus, BEKTV.plus. You can find all new episodes. We got another one coming up this week. Going to be a big show. And, of course, please like, share, and subscribe here on the channel. It helps us. As you know, we beat the algorithmic censorship overlords and gets this message out to more and more people. It's principle over party, principle over president, and a biblical truth overall. And so we thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.